The unexpected conversation. The afternoon sun filtered through the curtains of Mr. Sharma's study, casting elongated shadows across the polished wooden floor. Lakshmi, who had worked in the household for nearly 3 years, stood at the threshold, her worn dupatta adjusted nervously across her shoulder. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Her voice carried the practiced deference of someone who had learned to navigate the invisible boundaries between employer and employee. Mr. Sharma looked up from the papers scattered across his desk, his reading glasses perched precariously on his nose. The past months had etched deeper lines around his eyes, the consequence of sleepless nights and a burden he carried alone. "Please, sit down, Lakshmi." He gestured toward the chair opposite him, an invitation that immediately unsettled her. In 3 years, she had never been asked to sit in his presence. She lowered herself onto the edge of the seat, her posture rigid with uncertainty. "I need to tell you something," he began, his fingers drumming an anxious rhythm on the desk. "And I need your help." The words that followed over the next hour would indeed leave the household in stunned silence, but not for the reasons one might sensationally assume. Mr. Sharma explained that he had been diagnosed with a progressive illness. The medical bills were mounting, and he had kept this from his wife and children to avoid causing them distress. But the weight of carrying this secret had become unbearable. Lakshmi listened, her initial nervousness transforming into something deeper. Compassion mixed with the recognition of her employer's profound vulnerability. She had watched this family from the periphery of their lives, witnessing their joys and conflicts, yet remaining largely invisible to them. "Why tell me?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because," he said, meeting her eyes with unexpected honesty, "you're the only one who sees everything in this house without judgment. I've watched you care for my grandchildren, manage my wife's demands, navigate my son's moods, all with a grace that my own family sometimes lacks." What happened in that room was a conversation that bridged the chasm of class and circumstance, a moment where 2 human beings, stripped of their societal roles, acknowledged each other's humanity. Lakshmi agreed to help him prepare his family for the difficult conversations ahead, to be present as a steadying force during the revelation. When Mr. Sharma finally gathered his family that evening, Lakshmi stood quietly in the corner, as she always did. But this time, she wasn't invisible. As he spoke, his voice breaking with emotion, she remained, a silent witness to the family's collective grief, their questions, their eventual embrace. In the days that followed, the household changed. The family's perception of Lakshmi shifted from domestic help to someone who had been entrusted with their most vulnerable moment. She had not judged, had not gossiped, had simply offered her presence when it mattered most. The silence that followed Mr. Sharma's revelation was not one of scandal or shock in the salacious sense, but rather the profound quiet that descends when people confront the fragility of life and recognize the unexpected sources of strength that exist within their own walls. Sometimes the most powerful stories are not those of transgression, but of human dignity, unexpected compassion, and the bridges we build across the divides we create. The unraveling. The weeks following Mr. Sharma's disclosure transformed the household in ways no one could have anticipated. The revelation of his illness had cracked open something fundamental, not just the secret itself, but the carefully maintained facades each family member had constructed over years of cohabitation. Lakshmi found herself occupying an increasingly complicated position. She was no longer merely the woman who swept floors and prepared meals. She had become the keeper of the family's most vulnerable moment, and with that came an uncomfortable intimacy she had never sought. Mrs. Sharma was the first to change. The woman who had once issued commands without meeting Lakshmi's eyes now sought her out in the kitchen, lingering over tea, asking questions that had nothing to do with household duties. "How long did you know?" she asked one morning, her voice stripped of its usual authority. "Only hours before you did, madam," Lakshmi replied, her hands steady as she kneaded dough for rotis. "But he told you first?" It wasn't an accusation, but something more painful, a recognition of distance within her own marriage. The silence between them stretched taut with unspoken truths. Mrs. Sharma had spent 3 decades building a life of comfort and social standing, yet in her husband's darkest hour, he had turned to the woman who cleaned their bathrooms. The humiliation of this realization warred with a grudging understanding that Lakshmi possessed something she herself had lost somewhere along the way, the ability to simply listen without the burden of her own expectations. Rajiv, the eldest son, reacted differently. His father's illness had awakened a gnawing guilt he had suppressed for years. At 34, he had built a successful career in Mumbai, visiting home only on festivals, sending money as a substitute for presents. Now, forced to confront his father's mortality, he found himself watching Lakshmi with an unsettling mixture of gratitude and resentment. "You see more of my father than I do," he said to her one evening, finding her folding laundry in the courtyard. The accusation hung between them. Lakshmi kept her eyes on the clothes, her movements deliberate. "I work in this house, Beta. That is not the same as being his son." "Don't call me that," he snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. "I'm sorry." I should have been here." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw not the successful son who visited bearing expensive gifts, but a boy who had run from the suffocating expectations of his father's generation, only to discover too late that distance had cost him something irretrievable. "He speaks of you often," she said quietly. "With pride, always with pride. But yes, also with longing." The simplicity of her words undid something in Rajiv. He had expected judgment or platitudes, not this clear-eyed acknowledgement of his failures and his father's love existing simultaneously, without canceling each other out. But it was with Priya, the younger daughter, that the situation grew most complex. At 26, Priya had always been the rebellious one, the daughter who questioned traditions, who had fought to pursue her master's degree against her parents' wishes, who had broken off 2 arranged marriage proposals. She had viewed Lakshmi through the lens of her liberal education, a victim of systemic oppression, a woman denied opportunities by the accident of her birth. Now, witnessing Lakshmi's quiet strength in navigating the family's crisis, Priya found her neat theoretical frameworks collapsing. She began spending more time in the kitchen, initially offering to help with chores, an offer that made Lakshmi uncomfortable rather than grateful. "You don't need to do this," Lakshmi told her, gently taking the knife from Priya's hands as she attempted to cut vegetables. "This is my work." "But why should it be?" Priya insisted, her voice carrying the fervor of her convictions. "We're both women in this house. We should be—" "We are not the same," Lakshmi interrupted, her tone firm but not unkind. "And pretending otherwise does not honor either of us." The statement struck Priya with unexpected force. She had wanted to befriend Lakshmi, to demonstrate her enlightened values, but she had never actually asked Lakshmi what she wanted. In her eagerness to dismantle hierarchies, she had inadvertently created a new kind of burden, the expectation that Lakshmi should welcome this forced intimacy, should be grateful for Priya's progressive condescension. I'm sorry, Priya said, the words emerging smaller than intended. I thought I was helping. You want to help? Lakshmi's dark eyes held steady. Then let me do my work with dignity. And when your father needs you, be his daughter, not his nurse. I can prepare meals and manage medications. What he needs from you, I cannot provide. As Mr. Sharma's treatments progressed, the exhausting cycles of chemotherapy, the days when nausea left him hollowed out, the household found its new rhythm. But beneath the surface coordination lurked deeper currents. Mrs. Sharma's initial vulnerability hardened into something else. She began making decisions about her husband's care with renewed authority, sometimes overriding his expressed wishes. It was as though she needed to reclaim her position, to prove that she was still the primary figure in his life. One afternoon, she summoned Lakshmi to the bedroom where Mr. Sharma rested. From now on, you will inform me immediately of any changes in his condition, she said, her voice taking on the commanding tone Lakshmi had heard countless times before. You will not discuss his treatment or feelings with anyone else in this household. Is that understood? Lakshmi nodded, understanding perfectly. Mrs. Sharma was drawing boundaries, reasserting control over the territory she felt had been invaded. The brief moment of connection they had shared over tea was being systematically erased, replaced by the familiar architecture of employer and employee. But Mr. Sharma noticed. As his body weakened, his perceptions seemed to sharpen. He saw how his wife's fear manifested as control, how his son's guilt drove him to obsessive research into experimental treatments, how his daughter's ideological purity prevented her from offering simple comfort. And he saw Lakshmi, still present, still steady, asking nothing, expecting nothing, simply doing what needed to be done. They're afraid, he told her one morning when she brought his medications. His voice was thin, stripped down to its essential honesty by pain and exhaustion. And fear makes people cruel, even to those they love. Rest, sir, Lakshmi replied, adjusting his pillows. Your family loves you, that is what matters. But do they know me? The question hung in the air, unanswered, because there was no good answer. The complexity of Lakshmi's position deepened when Mr. Sharma began sharing things he couldn't tell his family, not secrets, but truths. Regrets about his own father's death, concerns about his daughter's unmarried status, disappointment that his son seemed to value career over family. These confidences placed Lakshmi in an impossible position. She was neither family nor friend, yet she held the intimate knowledge of a family's emotional architecture. Each conversation deepened her understanding while simultaneously emphasizing her permanent outsider status. She began to feel the weight of what she carried, not just the secret of his initial diagnosis, but the accumulating burden of his inner life, his fears, his humanity stripped of its patriarchal armor. And with that weight came a dangerous shift in her own emotions. She realized, with quiet alarm, that she had begun to care for Mr. Sharma not as an employer, but as a person whose suffering moved her in ways that transcended duty. This was not romantic affection. She was clear-eyed about that, but something equally complicated. Genuine human compassion entangled with the power dynamics that structured her entire existence. The question that haunted her late at night, lying on her thin mattress in the small room off the kitchen, was this: could authentic care exist within a fundamentally unequal relationship? Or was everything she felt contaminated by the economic dependence that bound her to this family? She had no answers, only the daily reality of waking before dawn to prepare the household's breakfast, of administering medications, of witnessing a man's slow diminishment while his family struggled with their own complicated grief. The silence in the household now was different from those early days after the revelation. This was the silence of people learning to live with truths they couldn't change, navigating the strange territory where love, duty, guilt, and fear intersected in ways that defied easy resolution. And Lakshmi remained at the center of it all, seen and unseen, essential and expendable, human and somehow still invisible, holding together a family that was simultaneously drawing closer and falling apart. The story would continue to unfold in ways none of them could anticipate, because this is the nature of families in crisis. They reveal who people truly are beneath the roles they've been assigned, and sometimes that revelation changes everything.